What's the word? George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732 on his father's plantation in Westmoreland, Virginia. He was born to Augustine Washington and Mary Ball Washington. George had 5 brothers and sisters and 2 half-brothers. His grandfather, John Washington, came over from England. At 17, George Washington started working on his father's plantation. When George was growing up, he never went to college or received any education. His half-brothers, Augustine and Lawrence, attended Appleby Grammar School in England. The first militia opportunity that he had was when he volunteered to tell the French soldiers and for necessity to leave. Later in his life, this led to the French and Indian War. He began a fight on Britain's side of the war. In one of the battles, he was shot 4 times in his coat and 2 horses were shot from under him. He still didn't get badly hurt. On July 24th, 1758, George Washington was elected to represent Frederick County in the Virginia House of Burgesses. Then, in 1759, George Washington marries Martha Curtis. She was married before, but her husband died. But she had 2 kids, John and Martha. April 1759, George moved his family to his home in Mount Vernon. Then, in 1775, George was chosen to lead the army during the American Revolution. The Second Continental Congress gave him the title Commander-in-Chief. Another victory for George Washington was when he led a secret mission on Christmas when his troops crossed the cold Delaware River. In the early morning, they attacked the soldiers from England. Eventually, the soldiers surrendered, and it was a huge win for George Washington. In 1778, George and his soldiers spent the winter in a camp called Valley Forge, where there was not enough supplies, such as food, clothing, or firewood, for the soldiers. Then, in 1783, George Washington resigns from the army after the win of the American Revolution. He then returned to his home in Mount Vernon. On April 30th, 1789, George Washington becomes the first president of the United States of America. His inauguration was in New York, the first capital of the United States. On January 5th, George becomes the president again. His inauguration was in Philadelphia, becoming the second capital in the United States. 1799, George Washington decided that it was someone else's turn to be president. He had been president for 8 years, so he retired and returned to Mount Vernon. On December 14th, 1799, George Washington dies from a throat infection. People cried and mourned for many years. Well, I mourned too after this.